The Galactic Academy of Survival Sciences was the oldest school of its kind in the known galaxy. For 12,000 years, it had trained young beings from hundreds of worlds in the art of staying alive. Students came from every corner of explored space to learn from the best instructors the galaxy had to offer. Instructor Bellatrix had taught at the academy for 17 years. She was a Mundari, a species made of living crystal that could feel vibrations in the air and sense temperature changes from across a room. Her body was beautiful in an alien way, with facets that caught the light and created small rainbows when she moved. She had seen many strange students in her time. She had taught the delicate Peluri, beings of soft flesh who could barely survive a strong breeze. She had guided the Vermox, creatures who breathed gases that would kill most other species. She had even helped a young silicate survive a temperature change of 4 degrees, which was considered extremely dangerous for their kind. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for humans. The message had arrived 3 weeks before the start of the new semester. 4 human students would be joining her advanced survival class as part of a cultural exchange program. Bellatrix had never met a human before. Very few beings in the galaxy had. The species had only recently made contact with the wider galactic community, and most of what people knew about them came from reports and rumors. Bellatrix had done her research. She had read every report she could find about the human homeworld. She had watched recordings from first contact. She had even spoken with a few merchants who had visited Earth and returned. To tell the tale, what she learned made no sense. The reports said that humans came from a planet with wild seasonal changes caused by the way their world tilted on its axis. They described a place where water fell from the sky as frozen crystals. They talked about ground that shook and cracked open without warning. They mentioned mountains that spat fire and rivers of melted rock that flowed across the land. The air pressure was crushing. The gravity was brutal. The local star blasted the surface with radiation that the humans simply absorbed with their bare skin. Bellatrix had dismissed most of these claims as exaggeration. Surely no thinking species could come from such a place. The galaxy did not produce worlds like that. And if it did, nothing could survive there long enough to develop civilization. Then the humans arrived. The shuttle docked at the Academy's main port on a quiet morning. Bellatrix waited in the receiving area with several other instructors, all of them curious about the new arrivals. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the humans stepped out. There were 4 of them. They moved with easy confidence, their steps heavy on the deck plates. Bellatrix could feel the vibrations through her crystalline body. These beings were dense. Their bones and muscles had been built by a punishing gravity well, and every movement they made spoke of contained power. Their eyes were the most unsettling thing. They faced forward, like predators. Both eyes pointed in the same direction, giving them depth perception for hunting. When they looked at Bellatrix, she felt an ancient instinct telling her to run. The leader of the group was a female named Katie Morgan. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back from her face. When she smiled in greeting, she showed the flat, grinding teeth that humans use to crush their food. The smile was meant to be friendly, but it made Bellatrix think of predators baring their fangs. Next to Katie stood a stocky male named Danny Reyes. He was shorter but wider, with thick arms and a barrel chest. His skin was marked with pale lines that Bellatrix later learned were scars. Humans apparently did not regenerate damaged tissue. When they were hurt, they simply healed over the wound with replacement material that stayed visible forever. Danny had many such marks. He had clearly been hurt many times and had survived every injury. The third human was a young female named Brooke Sullivan. She came from a region of Earth called Alaska, which was apparently so deadly that even other humans considered it extreme. She moved with a stillness that seemed peaceful at first. But Bellatrix noticed the way her eyes tracked every movement in the room. This was not the stillness of prey hiding from danger. This was the stillness of a predator waiting to strike. The last human was a thin male named Corey Henderson. He studied weather and atmosphere on Earth, spending long periods in a place called Death Valley. When Bellatrix looked up this location later, she learned that it was named for its tendency to kill visitors. Corey had chosen to work there because he found it interesting. Bellatrix stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome to the Galactic Academy," she said through her translator device. "I am Instructor Bellatrix. I will be teaching your survival classes this semester." Katie smiled again and held out her hand. Bellatrix knew from her research that this was a human greeting gesture. She extended one crystalline tendril to touch the offered hand. She immediately pulled back. The human skin was burning hot. The temperature was nearly 40 degrees on the standard scale. Any Mondari running that hot would be in serious medical distress. But Katie showed no sign of discomfort. She simply stood there, radiating heat like a small furnace. "Sorry about that," Katie said. She seemed to think Bellatrix had been confused by the gesture. "Human body temperature runs a bit warm. We make our own heat internally. You generate heat inside your bodies," Bellatrix said slowly. "All the time. Pretty much. Yeah. We run at about 37 degrees normally. It goes up when we exercise and down a little when we sleep. But it stays in that range constantly." Bellatrix felt her crystal structure vibrating with a mix of fear and fascination. These creatures had internal furnaces running at all times. They walked around burning energy just to maintain their temperature. "The metabolic cost must be enormous. How much do you need to eat?" she asked. Katie thought about it. "Maybe 2,000 calories a day for someone my size. More if I am being active." Bellatrix did the math. That was nearly 3 times what a Mondari needed. These humans burned through resources at an incredible rate just to stay alive. She looked at the 4 humans, standing in her receiving area. They seemed relaxed and friendly. They had no idea how terrifying they appeared to the other beings watching from a safe distance. This was going to be a very interesting semester. The other instructors had gathered behind Bellatrix, maintaining what they probably thought was a casual distance. But she could feel their nervousness in the vibrations of the air. Everyone had heard the stories about humans. Now they were seeing the reality. Danny noticed the watching crowd and gave a small wave. Several instructors flinched. "Are we making people nervous?" he asked. Bellatrix considered lying, but decided against it. The humans would figure it out eventually. "Yes," she admitted. "Your species has a certain reputation." Katie nodded as if this was expected. "We get that a lot. We will try to be gentle. Somehow." That statement did not make Bellatrix feel any better. The extreme survival classroom was designed to challenge the best students in the galaxy. Beings came from dozens of worlds to learn skills that might one day save their lives. The curriculum covered everything from finding food in hostile environments to building shelter from nothing. Students who graduated from this program were considered experts in their fields. The first test was always a written examination. Bellatrix believed in establishing a baseline. She needed to know what her students already understood before she could teach them anything new. The testing room was large and circular, with individual stations arranged in rings around a central platform. Each station was adjusted for the physical needs of different species. Some had water tanks for aquatic beings. Others had specialized atmospheric containment for those who breathed unusual gases. The human stations were basic chairs and desks, which the 4 Earth natives seemed to find amusing. Bellatrix distributed the examination datapads to her 47 students. The test contained 200 questions covering basic survival theory. It was designed to take approximately 4 hours to complete. Most students would need every minute, She explained the rules and started the timer. The examination began in silence. The Peluri students dimmed their light-sensing organs to concentrate. The Mondari stilled their vibrating crystals. The Vermox sealed their breathing membranes to enter a focused state. Everyone settled into their own methods of concentration. The humans pulled out small metal tubes and began making marks on the edges of their datapads. Bellatrix watched them with curiosity. The marking tools were primitive writing instruments that humans apparently still used despite having access to digital technology. The 4 students were scribbling notes to themselves as they worked through the questions. Danny Reyes finished first. Bellatrix checked the time. Only 47 minutes had passed. She walked to his station, certain there had been some mistake. The human was leaning back in his chair with his arms folded and his eyes closed. He appeared to be sleeping. You have completed the examination, she asked. Danny opened one eye. Yes, ma'am. Pretty basic stuff. Bellatrix picked up his datapad and began reviewing his answers. What she found disturbed her deeply. The first section asked about atmospheric requirements for different species. Danny had not only answered correctly, but had added notes explaining that humans could actually survive at much lower oxygen levels if given time to adapt. He mentioned something called altitude training, where humans deliberately lived in thin air to change their blood chemistry. He wrote that humans on Earth had climbed mountains where the oxygen was so thin that most galactic species would die in minutes. The temperature section was worse. The question asked students to identify the safe temperature range for their species. Most beings could tolerate a spread of perhaps 10 to 15 degrees. Danny had written a range spanning nearly 80 degrees. Then he added that humans could survive outside this range for extended periods using behavioral tricks like building fires and wearing protective coverings. The water purification section asked for 3 methods of making water safe to drink. Danny had listed 17. Some of them involved adding toxic substances to the water that would kill harmful organisms but apparently did not hurt humans in small amounts. Others involved boiling the water using friction-generated heat. One method simply said, let it sit in sunlight, and included a note about radiation killing bacteria. Bellatrix felt her crystalline structure destabilizing. The other 3 humans finished within the next hour. Katie completed her test in 53 minutes. Brooke took 61. Corey was last at 68 minutes, but he had apparently spent extra time adding detailed explanations to his answers. All 4 had perfect scores. More troubling, they had approached several questions from completely different angles. The test asked about building shelter in cold environments. Katie had described constructing insulated structures from vegetation. Danny had written about digging into snow for protection. Brooke had explained something called a debris hut. Corey had mentioned using body heat and group huddles. All 4 methods were correct. All 4 would work. Bellatrix gathered the humans after the other students had left. She needed to understand what she was dealing with. Your species has multiple valid survival strategies for identical scenarios, she said. How is this possible? Katie shrugged. Humans are adaptable. We did not evolve in just one environment. Our ancestors started in the African grasslands, but we spread across the entire planet before we developed advanced technology. Different groups figured out different ways to survive. You colonized multiple environments using primitive tools, stone tools and fire, mostly. We have populations living in deserts, rainforests, frozen wastelands, high mountains, and everything in between. Each group developed techniques that worked for their specific conditions. Bellatrix processed this information. Most species evolved in a single environment and remained adapted to that specific set of conditions. The Peluri needed their warm, humid world. The Mondari required stable temperatures. The Vormox could only breathe their native gas mixture. Humans had apparently decided that limiting themselves to one environment was unacceptable. Danny spoke up. If it helps, we are not really that special by Earth standards. Our planet has produced some really impressive survival specialists. Tardigrades can survive in vacuum. Some bacteria live in boiling acid. There are fish that freeze solid in winter and thaw out alive in spring. Your planet creates organisms that survive vacuum. Velathrix said flatly. And radiation. And extreme pressure. And temperatures that would melt most metals. Earth is kind of intense. Velathrix made a note in her personal file. She had initially planned to treat the human students like any others, perhaps making small accommodations for their unusual physiology. That approach was clearly inadequate. These beings were not normal students. They were products of a world that seemed designed to kill everything on it. The fact that they had survived that world and developed civilization meant they were capable of things that most galactic species could not. Imagine, she needed to rethink her entire teaching approach. Practical examinations would reveal more about human capabilities. Velathrix had designed challenges that pushed students to their limits. She would see how the humans performed under actual stress conditions. Part of her hoped they would struggle. It would make them easier to teach if they had weaknesses to address. But a larger part of her suspected that the humans would not struggle at all. They would probably find her carefully designed challenges boring. She was about to discover that her suspicions were entirely correct. The practical testing chambers were the pride of the Galactic Academy. Massive enclosed spaces could simulate environments from across known space. Students faced controlled versions of extreme conditions, learning to survive without actually risking death. The chambers had trained thousands of graduates over the centuries. Velathrix decided to start the humans with a cold environment test. She set the chamber to -15 degrees, with light snow falling from the ceiling systems. A thin layer of ice covered the ground. Most species needed heavy protective equipment to survive such conditions for more than a few minutes. Humans walked in wearing light fabric coverings and immediately started building something out of snow. Velathrix watched through this observation window with growing disbelief. Katie was directing the others to pile snow into a large mound. They packed it tight, then waited for it to settle. After about an hour, they began hollowing out the inside, creating a small cave within the snow pile. "What are you building?" Velathrix asked through the communication system. "Quingy," Katie replied. "Snow shelter. The packed snow traps air, which provides insulation. Body heat inside will keep the temperature much warmer than outside." The humans crawled into their snow cave. Brooke had gathered dead vegetation from the simulated environment and was arranging it into a small pile. She pulled out 2 sticks and began rubbing them together rapidly. Velathrix felt her crystal structure resonating with confusion. The human was generating heat through friction. It was an incredibly inefficient method, but Brooke made it look easy. Within minutes, a small flame caught on the dry vegetation. She carefully fed it larger pieces until a proper fire was burning. The temperature inside the snow shelter rose by nearly 20 degrees. The humans sat around their fire, completely comfortable, discussing what they should do next. Danny suggested hunting the local wildlife for food. Velathrix had to inform him that she had not programmed any wildlife into the simulation. Danny said, sounding disappointed. That would have made things more interesting. Velathrix ended the cold test after 2 hours. The humans had not even begun to show signs of distress. The heat test came next. She set the chamber to 52 degrees with almost no humidity. These conditions would cause rapid water loss and heat damage in most species. The Peluri would cook in their own shells. The Mondari would develop thermal fractures. The humans removed their outer clothing and found a shaded area. Corey took charge of this test. He had apparently spent years studying hot environments on Earth. He organized the group to conserve water, minimize movement during peak heat, and take turns staying alert while others rested. He also did something that Velathrix found deeply disturbing. Water began appearing on his skin, forming drops that rolled down his face and arms. "What is happening to you?" she demanded through the speakers. Sweating, Corey explained calmly. "Our bodies push water to the skin surface. When it evaporates, it takes heat with it. Cools us down. You are deliberately losing water to reduce temperature. Yes, it is very effective. We can shed heat faster than almost any land animal on Earth. That is actually how humans used to hunt. We would chase prey until it overheated and collapsed, then walk up to it." Velathrix struggled to process this. Humans had evolved as endurance predators. They had not been fast enough or strong enough to catch their food directly, so they had simply followed it until it died from exhaustion. This explains so much about their psychology. She ended the heat test when the humans began discussing how to find water in a desert environment. They were listing techniques that range from collecting morning dew to extracting moisture from certain plants. None of them seemed concerned about the conditions. The low oxygen test produced similar results. Velathrix reduced the air mixture to levels that would impair most species within minutes. The humans reported feeling slightly lightheaded, but continued functioning normally. Katie mentioned that many humans lived at altitudes with similar oxygen levels and considered it perfectly normal. The high-pressure test was supposed to simulate conditions on a world with a dense atmosphere. The humans found it uncomfortable, but manageable. Danny said it reminded him of diving deep underwater, which humans apparently did for recreation. The high-gravity test was the most embarrassing. Velathrix set the chamber to 1.2 standard gravities, a level that would exhaust most species within hours. The humans actually seemed more comfortable than they had at baseline. "This feels like home," Rook commented. "Earth gravity is about this level. The Academy baseline feels a little floaty to me." Velathrix reviewed her testing data with growing concern. She had run the humans through 5 different extreme environment simulations. They had treated each one as a minor inconvenience at worst. The cold test had been an opportunity to practice shelter building. The heat test had been a chance to discuss water conservation. The other tests had barely registered as challenges. She called a meeting with the other survival instructors. "I do not know how to teach these students," she admitted. "They have already exceeded our highest standards in every category. The environmental challenges that would push other species to their limits are recreation for humans." A Peluri instructor named Softlight made a worried sound. "Are they dangerous?" Velathrix considered the question carefully. She had spent weeks with the humans now. She had watched them interact with other students. She had seen how they handled challenges. "No," she finally said. "They are not dangerous to us. They are actually quite gentle and friendly. But they are capable of things we cannot match. Their planet has prepared them for conditions we cannot even simulate. What do we do with them?" Another instructor asked. Velathrix had been thinking about this problem. "We cannot teach them survival skills. They already know more than we do. But we can teach them how to help others survive. We can show them how to work with species who are not as resilient as they are." It was the best solution she could find. The humans were too capable to be regular students, but they might become excellent teachers. She did not know that the semester was about to provide a perfect opportunity to test this theory. A real emergency was coming, and the humans would show exactly what they were capable of when lives were actually on the line. The final practical examination was the most important test of the semester. Students were divided into mixed teams and placed in a large simulation chamber. They had to survive for 72 hours while completing various objectives. It was designed to test everything they had learned. Bellatrix had put the humans on a team with 3 Peluri, 2 Mandari, and 1 Vermox. She wanted to see how the Earth natives worked with more fragile species. Could they adapt their approach to help beings who were not as tough as they were? The first 47 hours went smoothly. The team worked well together. Katie had taken a leadership role, organizing tasks and making sure everyone contributed. Danny handled the physical work that required strength. Brooke managed their shelter and fire. Corey monitored the environment and warned them about changing conditions. The alien team members were impressed by the humans, but also a little nervous around them. They had heard the stories. They had seen the test results. But working alongside the Earth natives gave them a new appreciation for just how different these beings were. Then the environmental systems failed. It started with a small power surge. The thermal regulators in the simulation chamber malfunctioned. Emergency protocols should have triggered immediately, shutting down the test and evacuating the students. But a second failure knocked out the monitoring systems. The instructor team had no idea anything was wrong. The temperature in the chamber began to drop. Katie noticed first. She had been checking on one of the Peluri students when she felt the air growing colder. At first, she thought it was part of the test. But the temperature kept falling. Within minutes, it had dropped below the safe range for most of the alien species on her team. "Something is wrong," she announced. "This is not part of the simulation." The Peluri were already showing signs of distress. Their soft bodies were designed for warm, humid environments. Cold made them sluggish and slow. If the temperature dropped too far, they would enter emergency hibernation. If it dropped even further, they would die. The Mandari were cracking. Their crystalline structures could not handle rapid temperature changes. Tiny fractures were forming across their surfaces, each one causing pain and structural weakness. The Vermox was in the worst shape. Its gas exchange membranes were starting to freeze. It could barely breathe. Katie made a decision in seconds. She started barking orders. "Danny, start moving. Generate body heat. Brooke, get a fire going now. Corey, check everyone's vital signs and tell me who is worst off." The humans sprang into action. Danny began doing jumping exercises, working his muscles hard. His body heat production increased dramatically. His internal temperature rose as his metabolism burned fuel. He pulled off his outer shirt and wrapped it around the nearest Peluri student, then pressed his warm body against the alien's cold shell. Brooke gathered everything that could burn. She had her fire starting kit from the earlier tests. Her hands moved with desperate speed, rubbing the sticks together, generating friction heat. The cold air made it harder to get a spark, but she was determined. Corey moved between the alien students, checking their conditions. "The Peluri are going into torpor," he reported. "The Mandari have stress fractures. The Vermox needs warmth around its breathing membranes immediately." Katie grabbed Corey and positioned him next to the Vermox. "Press against it. Keep your warmest body parts near its membrane area." She pulled off her own jacket and created a makeshift tent around the Vermox's head, trapping the warm air that Corey was producing. The chamber temperature had dropped to -30 degrees and was still falling. Brooke finally got her fire started. It was small at first, barely a flicker, but she fed it carefully. The flames grew. Heat began radiating outward. She positioned the most vulnerable students closest to the warmth. Danny was now pressing himself between 2 Peluri, sharing his body heat with both simultaneously. His skin was turning red from cold exposure. Ice crystals were forming in his hair. But he did not stop. The Mandari students huddled near the fire. Their cracking had slowed as the heat reached them. One of them made a weak sound of gratitude. Katie organized everyone into a tight group around the fire. She used emergency blankets from their supply kit to create an insulated shelter. It was crude but effective. The temperature inside their makeshift camp was rising, even as the chamber grew colder. "How long can you keep this up?" one of the Peluri asked weakly. "As long as we need to," Katie said. The humans were suffering. Their extremities were showing early signs of frostbite. Their bodies were burning calories at an incredible rate to maintain core temperature, while also warming their teammates. But they did not complain. They did not stop. They just kept working. 30 minutes after the failure began, the rescue team finally broke through the chamber doors. Velathrix was first through the entrance. What she saw stopped her cold. The simulation chamber was a frozen wasteland. Ice covered every surface. The temperature had dropped to nearly -40 degrees. Any unprotected person should have been dead. Instead, she found a small group huddled around a fire under an improvised shelter. The alien students were alive, weak but stable, and the 4 humans were arranged around them like living shields, their bodies serving as heat sources for their more fragile teammates. Medical teams rushed in. They began treating the alien students immediately. The Peluri were brought out of their torpor. The Mandari received emergency repairs for their fractures. The Vermox had its membranes carefully warmed back to functional temperature. The humans sat quietly while they waited for medical attention. Danny's fingers and toes were white with frostbite. Brooke's hands were raw from fire-starting work. Katie and Corey showed signs of mild hypothermia from giving away too much of their body heat. They had hurt themselves to save their teammates, and they seemed to think this was completely normal. Velathrix approached Katie. "How did you do this?" Katie looked up at her with tired eyes. "Standard cold weather survival. Shelter, heat, group warmth. Humans have been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years. You use your own bodies as heat sources for the others. They needed warmth. We had warmth." Seemed obvious. Velathrix felt something shift in her understanding. These humans were not just tough. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for others without hesitation. They considered it basic, decent behavior. "Your species is very strange," she said softly. Katie managed a weak smile. "You have no idea." The graduation ceremony was held in the Academy's Grand Hall. Thousands of beings had gathered to watch the year's top students receive their certifications. Representatives from the Galactic Council had traveled from distant worlds to attend. News of the human students had spread far and wide, and everyone wanted to see them for themselves. Velathrix stood at the main podium, looking out at the crowd. She had taught at this academy for 17 years. She had seen many graduation ceremonies, but this one felt different. This one felt like the beginning of something new. The semester had changed after the chamber accident. Word of what the humans had done spread through the academy within hours. They had risked their own lives to save their alien teammates. They had suffered frostbite and hypothermia rather than let others die. And when asked why, they had simply shrugged and said it was the obvious thing to do. The alien students who had been saved became the humans' biggest supporters. They told everyone what had happened in that frozen chamber. They described how the Earth natives had wrapped their warm bodies around cold aliens without hesitation. They explained how humans had used their own metabolism as a heating system for beings who could not generate their own warmth. The other instructors had revised their opinion of the human students as well. They no longer saw them as potential threats. They saw them as potential allies. These beings from the death world were not just tough. They were kind. They were protective. They instinctively put themselves between danger and those who could not handle it. The rest of the semester had been dedicated to a new kind of education. The humans had become teaching assistants, sharing their survival knowledge with students from across the galaxy. Danny developed a cold weather training program that was already being adopted by other schools. Brooke wrote a guide to primitive fire starting that worked in multiple atmospheric conditions. Corey contributed to research papers on temperature regulation that changed how scientists understood extreme environment survival. But Katie had made the biggest contribution. Her final project was a complete analysis of why humans were so different from other galactic species. She explained how Earth had shaped her people over millions of years. Humans evolved on a world that was trying to kill them. Katie wrote in her paper, "Every generation faced predators, diseases, natural disasters, and extreme weather. The ones who survived were the ones who could adapt to anything. This process never stopped. It is still happening. Humans are products of endless challenge, and we have learned to see challenge as opportunity rather than threat." This explained everything about human behavior: their stubbornness, their creativity, their willingness to take risks that other species considered insane. They had been forged by a planet that offered no safe spaces. They had learned that the only way to survive was to be ready for anything. Bellatrix called the four humans to the stage. They walked forward with the same confident stride they had shown on their first day. But now that confidence was backed by official recognition. Each of them wore the Academy's highest honor, a distinction that had never before been given to first-year students. The crowd fell silent as Bellatrix prepared to speak. These beings came to us from a world that most of the galaxy would consider uninhabitable. She began. They faced our most difficult tests with abilities we did not know were possible. They saved lives when our own systems failed. And they did all of this while remaining humble, helpful, and genuinely kind. She turned to face the humans directly. "When you first arrived, I did not understand what you were. I saw your strength, and I was afraid. I thought you might be dangerous." "I was wrong," the crowd murmured. Many of them had felt the same fear when they first saw the humans. Many of them still felt it. "You are not dangerous," Bellatrix continued. "You are extraordinary. Your species survived a world that should not have produced intelligent life. You did this without losing your ability to care about others. You are everything the galaxy needs in exploration partners, and I am honored to have been your instructor." The crowd erupted in applause and other species-specific expressions of appreciation. Katie stepped forward to accept the graduation certificate on behalf of her group. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "When we came here, we were not sure how we would fit in. We knew we were different. We did not know if different would mean welcome." She paused and looked out at the assembled crowd. "You showed us that the galaxy has room for everyone. Even weird persistence predators from a death world." Laughter rippled through the audience. The tension that had filled the room began to fade. "We learned a lot here," Katie continued. "But the most important thing we learned is that survival has never been about being the toughest or the strongest. It is about working together. It is about protecting each other. That is how humans survived our planet. That is how we will survive the galaxy." She gestured to her teammates, human and alien alike. "We are not leaving this academy as four human graduates. We are leaving as part of a community. And we plan to make that community proud." The ceremony concluded with formal recognition of all the graduating students. But everyone knew that this year would be remembered for the humans. They had arrived as curiosities and departed as legends. 3 years later, Katie Morgan was named the first human team leader for a Galactic Council exploration mission. Her crew included Danny, Brooke, and Corey, along with representatives from 17 other species. Their first assignment was a planet that had been classified as too dangerous for normal exploration teams. Katie looked at the mission briefing and smiled. The world had high gravity, extreme temperatures, violent weather, and a barely breathable atmosphere. It reminded her of home. The mission was a complete success. They discovered new life forms, mapped unknown territories, and returned with data that would keep scientists busy for decades. When asked about their success, Katie had a simple answer. "We are humans," she said. "This is what we do." Somewhere across the galaxy, a crystalline Mondari instructor read the mission report and felt deep pride. Her students had done well, and they were just getting started. The galaxy had feared the Deathworlders at first. Now it was beginning to understand that these strange beings from Earth might be exactly what the universe needed. They were tough enough to survive anything, and they were kind enough to bring others along with them. The future looked brighter than ever before.